Hello everybody, this is Carl Leopson, your instructor for SERP 590, Single Case Research Design, and I'm going to talk to you today about your final project. And I want to walk you through the evaluation criteria for your project, and then I'm going to walk you through a couple of sample student projects from former semesters where the students did really well. Try to explain some of those sections to you and give you a little more information. And then you can also this week ask me about any of those issues in the discussion section of our D2L course, right? So you can see here that we have 5 major parts of your research proposal that are evaluated. There's the introduction, and it consists of the lit review and the research questions. We'll get into that in just a minute, but you can see the research questions we've been working on the whole semester. You got that down pat. That's like 4 points in your back pocket. Boom, done. The next big section is the methods section, and the methods section includes smaller pieces like subjects, setting, materials and equipment, the dependent variable or variables, the independent variable or independent variables, and then a little blurb about your experimental design. That's another thing that we've been talking about all semester. So I'll give you the details on that when we walk through this with the student projects, but there are really 4 criteria I'm looking for, and you'll get 1 point for doing each one of those. The next big section you can see on here is the procedures section. And the procedures section, it's like if you weren't going to be there to run the project, how would you describe for somebody to do it? It's not about data collection. It's about basically how a session runs. It's like if you were going to describe for somebody, you couldn't be there to do a session with your clients one day. How would you describe to them how to actually engage in running the session? All right. It's in the data collection and analysis section, which is next, where you describe how you're going to collect the data on the dependent variable, including getting IOA. How are you going to collect data on the independent variable, which is your treatment integrity or your fidelity or how well the intervention is implemented? And then there is the section on data collection for social validity, which means how are you going to get information to let folks know whether or not this was a useful intervention or not. And then the last thing I'm going to do is evaluate your project on style and format. So I'll be looking for general APA style commitment, whether or not your descriptions are replicable and technological, meaning are they written technically in such a way that somebody could implement them. Is it organized in a way that makes sense? And if you follow the organizational structure I've given you, that's 2 points you get right there if you use the template. And then is it conceptually systematic? And by that, I mean, after I read the whole thing, does it all fall together and I say, I can see what this person wants to do, right? Let's move on to seeing how we take all these pieces and put them into an actual project. So here is an example of a project, and this project is from a student, and it was about the effects of increased support for paraprofessionals. So you can see it starts with a title page. It has a running head up at the top, effects of increased support for paraprofessionals. That's all in APA style. It has a page number. These things are going to be multiple pages. It's really useful for me to have you provide a page number so that I can refer to a page number when I'm giving you feedback. the first thing you're going to have is the introduction section. Okay? And the review of literature, really all I'm looking for is that you take a couple of articles like we did in one of those early weeks in this class, that you take a couple of articles and tell me how they are related to what you're interested in. Okay? So in this case, you can look through what they did for their literature review. You're going to end your literature review with the research question, right? So just tack it right on the end. So you're going to say the purpose of this study is to X, and then just spell out your research question. The next big section is the methods section of the proposal. In participants, what you want to do is describe very specifically how many participants you expect to have. If you're doing a withdrawal design, A-B, you could have one subject and still get an experimental design in. If you are doing a multiple baseline design, you're going to need multiple. If multiple baseline design across participants, you'll need multiple participants. If you're doing a multiple baseline design across settings with one person or across behaviors with one individual, then you could just have one participant. But you want to give the age and some of the basic characteristics of the participant. Don't go on forever. This is not a history or inventory for this person. It's just a pretty short description. Okay. In this case, they were paraprofessionals, 4 paraprofessionals. The next piece is the setting. Again, just the basic elements of the setting. Where it's going to be carried out. School, clinic, home. Just a couple general characteristics of the setting that would help somebody understand their setting better and your study better. The materials. So materials doesn't mean necessarily every form or every piece of IOA paperwork. It does mean, like, if somebody's going to need a stopwatch for some intervention they're doing or some data collection, you probably want to include that here. If somebody needs, for your study, if you need, or if somebody to replicate it, would need to have a selection of tangible items or tangible reinforcers, those are materials you'd need. Chalkboard and chalk, paper, pencil, crayons, a car, whatever you think you would need in terms of materials. Because if you do go to actually do this proposal, whoever your advisor is, and if it was me, I want to know what kind of resources do you need and do you have them? All right. The next important piece is the dependent variable, and you guys ought to be able to crush this, right? So what I want in the dependent variable section is a descriptive, observable, measurable description of the behavior that you're intervening with, right? The independent variable is a description of your intervention. And this is where, if you were doing something like functional communication training, or if you're doing a workshop, or if you're doing a some kind of level system with students, you would describe that in detail at this point in your proposal. Now, experimental design is worth 4 points. And this is something we've been talking about all through class. And there are 4 things, I'm trying to remember, I hope it's 4. I'm pretty sure the 4 things exactly that I'm looking for that'll get you those 4 points. All right. 1, tell me what design you're going to use. Multiple baseline, withdrawal, changing criterion, alternating treatments, multi-element design. But give me the name of a design. Okay. Second, tell me why you selected it. So I chose a withdrawal design because it's the simplest design to use if the treatment can be withdrawn. Or I chose a multiple baseline design because the treatment was something that couldn't be withdrawn. We taught a skill. Okay? Tell me why you didn't select something else, right? So what's one of the things that warned you off selecting another design? And then tell me how this design is going to show an experimental control. Okay, that's the fourth thing. Tell me what you're measuring across. So in my ABAB design, I will be able to demonstrate experimental control when the student goes from baseline to intervention. Again, when the student goes from intervention back to baseline. And once more, we'll demonstrate experimental control when the student goes from baseline to the second intervention, right? That's it. Experimental design, big section, 4 points, but you can handle that. The next section is procedures. I'm going to be pretty lenient on this section. It's a hard section to write. Read the examples. It's not about data collection. It's about how would somebody physically go in and do this. It takes some real technical writing skill. Take a look. Let me know if you have more questions later, but it's, how many sessions will you have of baseline? How many sessions will you have of intervention? How long are sessions? They start to talk a little bit about data collection. We don't need to do a lot of that. Where do people sit? Who else is going to be there? All right. And after you describe baseline, if you want to say intervention is exactly the same as baseline sessions, except with the introduction of the intervention procedure. The data collection and analysis section, that's where you get into the nitty-gritty, and I think it was in week 5 where we talked more about data collection, right? So you should be able to go back to some of these weeks that we worked on and grab information that you thought about for your research question. In this case, for dependent variable, tell me how you're going to measure that dependent variable. We talked about the kind of recording method you should use. And then tell me how you're going to do IOA, or inter-observer agreement. So under dependent variable, both parts that need to be there for you to get both points. How do you measure the dependent variable, and how do you get IOA on the dependent variable? For the independent variable, I'm going to give you 2 points just for remembering to have it and telling me how you are going to evaluate whether or not the intervention is actually happening the way it should happen. Same thing with social validity. Just get in there. We talked a little bit about how you could measure social validity also. Like, what would you do for that social validity piece? Most people will use a questionnaire. In this case, it was a questionnaire with the paraprofessionals, the supervisors, and the students. Let's quickly walk through one other proposal so you can see what it looks like. So this was positive reinforcement of escape maintained behaviors. There is a cover page. There is a review of the literature. It's only a couple pages long. You can see it's only like a page and a half long. And it ends with a paragraph that says, the purpose of the study is, and then they provide their research question at the very end. Does providing positive reinforcement increase compliant behavior in students who have escape maintained behaviors? All right. Here, this person, remember, if you're going to talk about individuals, use fictitious names. So they pick they have one student, and the student's name is Zane. Okay. and they tell you the age of the student, the diagnosis, how this kid is identified, and the kinds of interventions that are already taking place. Since their issue is with escape-maintained behaviors, they talk a little bit about that too. The study is taking place in one place, in Zane's special day classroom, and they describe it briefly. They describe the materials and equipment, so they've got a lot of data collection forms and a preference assessment form also. Okay, and it's a testing kit that includes edibles, toys, books, and iPad applications for Zane. You see what I'm saying here? They're pieces and parts that they need in order to make this study happen. They tell me their behavioral definitions of the dependent variable. All right, so they describe compliant behavior and challenging behavior, and they give me observable definitions. For the independent variable, they describe what they're going to do in terms of positive reinforcement. Under experimental design, they do a really extensive job in this proposal of answering those 4 questions and probably going even farther, right? Answering the questions: what design did you choose? Why did you choose it? Why didn't you choose something else? Why won't something else work? And how does it show experimental control? Then there is the procedures section, and they do a good job of talking about how many sessions, how long are sessions, what do the sessions look like, how many trials are in a session, the baseline probe sessions, how they are specific, and then the intervention phase, how it is different from the baseline and probe sessions. Finally, they get to data collection and analysis, and they tell me about the dependent variable, the direct measurement of their dependent variable, and how they're going to collect inter-observer data. They tell me about the independent variable, how they're going to collect treatment integrity data, and finally, the social validity, or how they're going to collect data on whether or not the intervention is being implemented as planned. Well, that was a really quick review of the actual sheet that we're going to use and the criteria and all the elements of the proposal, and a little more in depth into a couple of these proposals, just where these pieces are, kind of what I'm looking for. You may want to read through these proposals. You can borrow liberally from them as it makes sense. Just make sure that they are written specifically for yours. I do read these really carefully. So if you have any questions at this point, please look through these things. The text is pretty good too. It'll help give you some insights. But ask me some questions this week in the discussion section. I will give you the absolute best answer I can give you. All right? Guys, take care. Best of success and low stress in the next week while you work on your projects.